By looking at this one movement, I can learn almost everything I need to know about how somebody operates on a training floor. I can figure out what ranges of motion they're going to operate best in, what movements they're going to have trouble with, and ultimately figure out their starting point. A bonus is that I can give those that can't touch their toes that unexpected feeling of being able to in less than 5 minutes with one of two drills I'm going to show you today. So in today's video, I'm going to break down 3 ways that I look at the toe touch exercise and how I follow up by giving one of 2 approaches to someone based on what I see. Sometimes the hamstrings are what get unfairly blamed in the scenario of being unable to touch the toes. Somebody leans over, realizes they can't get very far, and immediately grab their hamstrings and start saying, yep, I need to stretch them more. I've always been really tight. But the reality is that when it comes to your ability to lean over for the floor and move your hips back in space, it's less about the hamstrings and it's more about how your pelvis and rib cage operate together. If this band represents your hamstrings and my hand is your pelvis, if we take the backside of the pelvis and start to pull it up, we will start to notice a whole lot of tension on those hamstrings. If I try and then go and stretch those hamstrings farther, we're just going to lead to more tension and not actually solving the root cause of why we can't seem to touch the floor. But if I take that pelvis and teach you how to drop a pelvis down in space, now we have a little less tension on that hamstring, and then we can start reaching over for the toes without that limitation. And so we're going to look at these 3 ways that I view a toe touch overall. The first place that I start looking at a toe touch is when I'm standing beside somebody and I look at the entire length of their spine. And for many, you'll notice that they have an inability for that spine to actually move at all. They end up in that extremely straight position with no actual flexibility through their spine. And it's making them have to move through other areas, AKA their hips and their hamstrings, and it's not making up for that lack of movement through the spine. And so that gives me a little bit of insight into how I might approach their training thereafter. In this second version, I'm looking primarily at the hips in terms of how far back they can actually go. Often what I'll see in somebody that actually lacks hip movement, specifically internal rotation of those hips, is the hips barely move back at all and they get the rest of their movement through their arms and through their spine, which if they can get to the floor is great because it shows just how much range of motion they have through that spine. But often they will end up picking things up off the ground through their arms and through their back instead of using those strong hamstrings and hips to operate. So it tells me another part of the story that I can address later. The third thing that I'll actually look at as you look at this toe touch in which the hips are traveling back in space, the spine is fully moving, is I will talk about how they are breathing. If I see them often holding all of their breath when they go into a toe touch, I know there's certain moves I can teach them for better exhalation to allow more freedom of movement through their spine and the hips. And so by going and learning these 3 things that I see in a toe touch, I then can start to figure out whether or not they are lacking the necessary rotation of the hips to get down into a toe touch position. Which brings us to rotation. A lot of times people blame those hamstrings when really it's about how your hips operate in their sockets internally and how the bone connected to those hips operates as well. And so when I go into a toe touch to initiate the movement, I actually need internal rotation of those hips. To finish a movement at the bottom, I'm going to need external rotation of those hips. If I lack either one of those, I am going to have difficulty getting down to the floor, and I'm going to have to get it from other areas, a longer reach, more rounding through the spine. And so when I know that somebody can't move their hips back, I immediately shift to drills for internal rotation. If I know somebody is falling just short of their toes, and they have trouble squatting like in this video here, then what I can do is start working on external rotation, which we're going to go over right now. Some things to pay attention in this 90-90 hip tuck with hip internal rotation video is how the initial setup occurs. We're getting the hips, knees, and feet all at 90 degrees. We're taking something to put between the knees to help drive those knees inward. And we're putting a big focus on really long exhales to help keep a rib cage under control. We're learning how to tuck those hips a little bit off the ground, and we're getting big reaches. If I put all of this together with very long exhales over just 1 to 2 minutes of breathing, you're going to find that we actually open up more hip internal rotation for those hips and allow you to get farther into range of motion on the toe touch. In this video, where we work on hip external rotation, we're actually going to what we call a quadruped rock back with reach. Now, this move is actually a way simpler version to achieve this. There are other drills that we might utilize like this one and this one, but they do require a lot more focus and effort to occur. So this is a great one to drop into when you want to just execute the movement with a little bit less thought. As you'll see here, the big part is we're allowing those hips to sit as far back as we can with long arms getting forward. A few key cues here are making sure that we're getting very long exhales and silent inhales as we go through the movement. If you do this well, you actually start to feel a stretch in your mid back, upper back, and sometimes lower back. So if you're lacking hip external rotation, finding that you're just short of the ground on the toe touch, this is a great one to execute and see how you feel after.